Okay, Julian, take it away.
All right. Hello. Thank you. I am very excited to be joined by an incredible panel here today, welcoming Dr. Beverly Wright, the founding director of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, Inc., Dr. Kristin Mmari, associate professor, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and Jerome Foster II, executive director and founder of 1 Million of Us. And we're here today to speak about health and environmental justice, a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So to open it up and kick us off, what does environmental inequality mean to you and to your work? Starting with you, Dr. Wright.
Okay, well, good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. Environmental inequality, for me, is very personal. And what it basically means is that in the area where I live, the Mississippi River Chemical Corridor in Louisiana, which is located between the big cities of New Orleans and Baton Rouge, is home to 156 petrochemical plants and 6 refineries, all of which are in an 80-mile stretch of land. It means that I grew up with all of these scents and smells and wondering whether or not it would affect me. But everyone around us really saw it as something positive because it meant jobs, it meant wealth. So whenever you would smell, this odor that was unpleasant, I remember my father saying, that smells like progress. So we had no idea that all of these chemicals were affecting us. And we were told, even though people knew, that it was harming us. Consequently, I live in a place where we have the highest cancer rate in the nation. And of the top 10 cancers, Louisiana is number 1 in 7 of those cancers. And the people most affected are African Americans living along the Mississippi River Chemical Corridor. And inequality is basically this. White people were bought out when the chemical plants wanted to expand. Black people were left to languish. And so at my center, maybe the first GIS mapping of the corridor by race and income, and we basically showed that African Americans live within 3 miles of a polluting facility. In fact, 80% of African Americans along the corridor, including in the city of New Orleans, live closest to TRI polluting facilities than do whites. That is not an accident. It is a pattern, and is based on a history of racial discrimination.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wright, for framing and centering us on what these issues are with environmental injustice in this country. Turning to you, Dr. Amari, could you tell us about your work and how environmental inequality, what it means to you in your work?
When I think of environmental inequality, I think of Baltimore City, which has over 18,000 vacant lots and an additional 17,000 abandoned buildings. And predominantly African Americans and low-income people are living next to these areas. But recent research has shown that if we can green these areas, it actually improves health. But yet, if we look at where green spaces are located, they're predominantly in higher income and white neighborhoods, which is complete inequality. And so I am, in my line of work, I am trying to improve that, and especially looking at the distribution of how we can better locate parks and green space in these inner cities, and particularly around adolescents, which we know that adolescents are very influenced by the neighborhood. But yet very little has been done in terms of interventions in trying to improve their access to green space, which has been shown to improve mental health and a host of other outcomes.
Thank you. And turning to Jerome Foster II, could you tell us about your work and what environmental inequality means to you?
Absolutely. I think that from the youth climate movement, we've seen a sense of allyship with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the climate justice movement, really building the bonds between understanding the intersectionality between racism and climate justice. And when we look at America, we're seeing 71% of coal-fired power plants placed in Black and brown communities. So all of the organizing that we do, all of the work that's done, whether that's marches or protests or online campaigns, it's always centering Black and brown folks because a lot of the people that have been environmental fighters have been our indigenous people. They have been the environmentalists before any of us were here. And it's really honoring them and honoring their work in generations of sacrifice that we continue to strengthen our movement overall. And I think that also when we talk about like implementing solutions in accordance with the IPCC report on 1.5 degrees of Celsius, it's really talking about the aspects of equity that needs to be included whenever we're implementing a solution. Just not trying to figure out how do we put a solar panel on a house, but how do we help to ensure that frontline communities have the resources and accountability that's needed to make sure that their communities are safe. Because the communities that are impacted the first and worst are people that haven't polluted the most in the grand scheme of things around the world. So it's about the equity and dynamic of the global South has been impacted so heavily by the climate crisis, and they've emitted less than the global North and around China and America and Russia, all these countries that are continuing to pollute but aren't seeing any impacts in their own community. So I think that really, when it talks about environmental racism, it's at its core a sense of empathy and a sense of allying ourselves to other communities that we may not be familiar with, but have to understand their struggle and how we organize, how we implement solutions, and everything in between.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So for this next question, personally, I came from the environmental justice and climate justice movement, which is what brought me into public health. And just last December graduated from the school with my MPH, and then COVID-19 hit. And so today in my work at the health department, COVID-19 is everything that I'm doing in terms of the health inequities that come with COVID-19. And so as environmental justice and climate justice leaders in your communities, going through the same order, I'm interested to hear how has the COVID-19 pandemic influenced you in your work and influenced the communities and the environmental justice and climate justice issues that you're working on. Starting with you, Dr. Wright.
I believe that Mardi Gras in the city of New Orleans ushered in an unbelievable COVID-19 attack on mostly African-American people in our community. Our famous Zulu Club, as they're called, lost quite a few of their members to COVID-19 before we even knew that this was a pandemic. Secondly, I think what happened in Louisiana, in one of our really small towns or community, was that, that community ended up having the highest death rate from COVID early on. And everyone was trying to figure out why. So that same corridor that I told you about that we've been working on that has so much pollution, like 287 million pounds of pollution emitted into the air, water, and soil, which is more than the state of Texas. So you're talking about an 80-mile stretch of land. And this little small community is one of the highest polluting areas from these different facilities. The death rate from COVID was amazing, and nobody could figure out why. Then suddenly we found out that there is a romantic relationship between PM 2.5 and COVID-19. In fact, COVID hitches a ride with PM 2.5. That's pollution mostly from petrochemical plants and those types of industries. And it goes deep into our lungs and kills us. And so if you live in an area where there are large amounts of PM 2.5 and the pandemic hits, then you're very likely to get COVID-19 in a way that it kills you. A lot of people talked about pre-existing illnesses. Well, that may be true, that we do have pre-existing illnesses, but PM 2.5 is the number one pre-existing condition that has killed most of us. So I looked at some research that showed that in 49 states, 79% of African Americans live in highly polluted areas where we have large amounts of PM 2.5. And so what we see is that if we continue in this pandemic era, we can expect that we will be more and more affected because of where we live. And those conditions exist because of racism and discrimination.
Absolutely. Thank you. Turning to you, Dr. Amari, how has COVID-19 impacted your work in Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, very much in the same way that Dr. Wright was saying. If you think about what people have been doing to cope with COVID, many people have been flocking to nature, going outside. That is the one place where you can go, and people have said we can social distance. But think about an inner city. Where are those places? It's really, I think, affected, especially inner city populations where it's just so lacking in that respect. So I am really trying to think about adolescents too, in terms of where they like to meet with their friends and where are their safe places in the neighborhoods where they can meet. And it's just really sad that there's so few places. And so that is part of my mission, is to try to help increase those green spaces.
Thank you. Jerome, how about you with your work? How has COVID-19 impacted your community, impacted the work that you do in the climate justice movement and as a youth leader?
Yeah, I think that for the climate justice movement, a lot of our work has shifted to trying to have deeper conversations, because Zoom allows for us to be able to build community and to not just attend a march and try to make sure that we get attention around an issue and then see that reaction and then go home. It's more of us building community, talking to our own people and saying, hey, how can we continue to work and advocate for a specific piece of legislation? How can we get an elected official on this Zoom call to actually talk through the nuances of specific legislation and things like that? I think that's really how our work has changed, because we've had the opportunity to look within ourselves and said, what's the next step for the youth climate movement? We have done so many climate strikes. We've done so many demonstrations. How do we make sure that we're continuing to disrupt and continuing to spread the urgency of the climate crisis? I think another way that has indirectly impacted our work is a global understanding of our shared humanity, whether that's in Wuhan, China, or Italy, or Arizona, or New York City. We've seen that everyone is experiencing the COVID-19 crisis in the same way. So it's in a way changed their understanding of the climate crisis, because we've seen that the COVID-19 pandemic you can't insulate yourself from it. You can't hide yourself away from this crisis. Everyone has to work together and be a collective unit to make sure everyone's safe. And I think that's increasingly apparent when it comes to climate change, because for so many young people, we've sacrificed our prom, we've sacrificed our graduation, we sacrificed a lot for older generations to be able to have the safety that they need, because they're at higher risk brackets for coronavirus. I think it's also an interesting parallel, because now we're asking the same thing. We're asking for older legislators and people in power to say young people are at most risk for the climate crisis. And we need for adults to step up and to sacrifice some things in their lives to make sure that we have a safe and livable future. And it's just been a continuous adaptation to a new world, understanding that many of these crises are crystallizing in these different movements. They're compounding on one another. And a lot of times before the COVID-19 pandemic, we thought, oh, these different movements happen in a vacuum. But we've seen that Black Lives Matter. We've seen that COVID-19. We've seen that economic non-prosperity has really compounded into an amalgamation of different crises that we have to face in new systemic ways. And I think that's changed our entire perspective on how we organize and everything like that.
Thank you so much. That's really powerful how you said that youth being there to support elders in this time of COVID-19 and asking the same in return, with climate changes being the most impacted. Building off of that, could you tell us a bit more about how you're engaging other youth around environmental justice, resonating around it, building power as a youth movement, and what lessons that can have for building intergenerational struggle and movement together, and what you need adults in this world to do in terms of following your leadership?
Yeah, I think that for the youth movement, a lot of the work that we are trying to continue to do and move forward with is making sure that we have different impacts. We can't just stay in the world of having articles and having public conversations and public forums, but actually having pieces of legislation, having our adults or having our friends call a member of Congress, actually making sure that we hold our elected officials accountable, because we aren't going to get anything done if we're going to continue marching for the next 10 to 15 years. We have to continue to push the pedal even further to make sure that this is a complete urgent crisis, that they're understanding that there's a timeline on this. I think that another thing is for adults is to understand that there is intergenerational organizing. And I think that there's ways that you come into organizing that allows us to coexist and not to take over. A lot of our young organizers, we plan a march in New York City or plan a march in Washington, D.C. An adult might come in and say, we got this, we can organize this march for you. And it's like, we got this too. Let's organize it together. Let's be at the table and talk about how we can use TikTok and how we can use Instagram to organize more and more people. Because we reached 11 million people, not even being physically in the same country. So it's that organizing of like, how do we create an international movement and sustain it, and also have adults that are supporting us in ways that we can't. Like for so long, young people have felt really helpless in the environmental movement up until 2020 because we weren't able to vote. We had no ability to influence politics. And adults have that understanding of the system and understanding of how to create systems of change. And I think that's really where these allyships form from and can build.
Thank you. And then I would like to close out with Dr. Wright. You do so much incredible work in the Deep South. And just wanted to if you can close us out, and what lessons do the rest of the country have to learn about the organizing on the ground in the Deep South, and what do people need to understand about that in this current time that we're living in?
Thank you. First of all, I think people already know that the South is a different place. It's not New York. And so we have to go about doing things a little bit differently, and we are different. But I do want to speak to what Jerome was speaking about when you talk about youth and adults taking over. You know, at 73 years old, and I've marched so often, I am so happy to see young people marching. I am very happy to turn over the reins. We certainly want to be a support, but at 73, you know, come on, y'all. You take over, and we're happy to have that done. If it weren't for COVID, many of us would have been marching with you. Many of us in wheelchairs, because we are the old militants. We are still extremely militant. We're just not young anymore. So at the Deep South Center, we have the HBCU Climate Change Consortium that Dr. Robert Bullitt and myself put together with no money, that has now grown to 32 HBCUs and over 300 young people participating every year. And we bring young scholars together with community-based organizations or community members who are suffering right now, so that if you want to be a scholar, then you need to, a researcher in this field, you need to know what's happening on the ground, not just what you read in the journals in your little cubby in libraries. We need them to connect. We're now on our 7th year. It would have been the 8th year this year, but we postponed it. It is an amazing connection between old scholars, young scholars, research experts, young people who are extremely militant, others who are extremely conservative, the gamut. We cover that for an exciting meeting once a year. And we are happy to include young people. There should not be this division. I don't understand the division. It should be that we all work together and support young people, because they are our future. We need them to take over. So I don't care how many people believe that they're not going to get old, you will. And you need to then turn the reins over, but make sure that the young people are prepared. That only happens with discussions with elders.
Absolutely. And on that theme, the intergenerational struggle together, closing out on a call to action for public health, to be engaged in supporting environmental justice movements, social justice movements, Black Lives Matter, the movements that are creating the changes we need to see for health equity and for the public health goals in the world. And with that, thank you all so much for your time and for this incredible panel and sharing your expertise with us.